I was supposed to have the triple threat combo of wealthy heir, story transmigrator, and hidden protagonist, but I somehow managed to turn myself into a corner bookstore owner, devoted cat person, and professional nap coach. What he didn't realize was that in any normal power fantasy novel, a setup like this would be a script-breaking bug. The fake heir who stole my identity has been a titan at the corporation for over 20 years, and he probably thought my arrival would kick off some grand drama of revenge and reclamation. But all I wanted to do was block my inheritance like it was spam. He got anxious, which led to an absurd series of events. Hiking my rent to force me out, throwing a black card at my face, kneeling at my door begging me to take over, hitting on my friend, getting sent to my shop as an intern for punishment, and finally, me ending up with the deeds to the entire street. The whole world thought I was playing the long game, hiding my true power by feigning retreat, but only I knew the truth. I was just too lazy to move. In a world where life is a constant comedy, the most satisfying reversal isn't reaching the summit. It's lying at the base of the mountain, watching everyone else struggle and sweat their way to the top. When you find yourself dropped into a novel as the long-lost, top-tier heir to a massive fortune, the only logical choice is to become a world-class slacker. So why is the guy who stole my identity pounding on my door every day, crying and begging me to come home and inherit a multi-billion-dollar business empire? Dude, have you lost your mind? My name is Edward Caldwell, and I'm the owner of this little old bookstore on the verge of closing down. Business is slow, the kind where you just barely break even. But I have another identity. I'm the true long-lost heir to the massive Pierce family fortune, one of the wealthiest families in the entire country. This is my third year in this world, and I've long since accepted this ridiculous premise. But go back to the Pierce estate? Not a chance. Are you kidding me? Going to an office every day to fight corporate enemies, dealing with a flock of high society debutantes, and plowing through mountains of business textbooks. I would much rather be curled up in my worn-out bookstore, dozing off in a rocking chair that's about to fall apart, letting the sun warm my face. Embracing the slacker life is the universal truth. That has always been my guiding principle. At least it was until that day. That day, a ridiculously conspicuous, bright red Maserati pulled up in front of my shop. The engine roared so loudly it made the old glass panes in my windows rattle. A man stepped out, his custom suit perfectly tailored, his hair slicked back so tight it looked like a helmet. It was Ashton Pierce, the imposter who had been living my life under my name for over 20 years. He kicked open my already rickety shop door, and the old would groaned in protest. I barely even bothered to lift my eyelids. I watched him lazily from my old rocking chair, and he stared right back at me. The expression on his face was a complete mess of contempt and disdain, mixed with something I couldn't quite place, a sort of desperate, red-eyed anxiety. "Edward Caldwell?" he asked, his voice dripping with the condescending tone of a police interrogation. I gave a slow nod, the rocking chair continuing its gentle sway. My complete lack of a reaction clearly threw him for a loop. The long, scathing monologue he had prepared seemed to get caught in his throat. He took a deep breath, pulled a black Amex from his inner suit pocket, and tossed it onto a stack of paperbacks. "There's 10 million on the card. The pin is all 8s. You have two choices," he said, his voice regaining its confident, assertive edge. "One, you take the money and come back with me to the Pierce family estate to claim your birthright. Two, I make it impossible for you to survive in this city." I finally sat up, picked up the card, and twirled it between my fingers. A smug smirk played on Ashton's lips. He clearly thought I had taken the bait. A second later, I flicked the card. It bounced neatly off his chest and clattered to the floor. "I'll take option 3. The smile on Ashton's face froze. "Option 3. Get out," I said calmly, settling back into my rocking chair and picking up a copy of 100 Years of Solitude. "Don't bother me while I'm working." Ashton's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. I'm guessing no one had ever spoken to him like that in his entire life. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "You don't know what's good for you. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Look at the state of you. Look at this dump. How much do you make in a month? A few $100s. Come back with me to the family. You could be on top of the world." With a flick of my wrist, I turned a page, pointedly ignoring him. His chest heaved as if he were wrestling with some monumental decision. After a few seconds, he ground out through clenched teeth. "Fine. Very good. You made your choice. I'm telling you, since you love this pathetic slacker life so much, I'll take it. Wait, no, that's not right. You're going to be the heir, whether you want to or not." After that absurd, nonsensical threat, he spun around, stormed out of the shop, and peeled out in his Maserati, tearing down the street. I watched his taillights disappear around the corner and let out a huge yawn. Give up my perfect slacker lifestyle to be some trust fund kid born with a silver spoon in his mouth? In his dreams, the greatest wisdom in life is knowing when to stop fighting it and just let go. I figured that was the end of it, just a weird little interruption in my day. I had no idea it was only the beginning, the opening act of an absurd comedy whose only only goal was to force me to inherit a billion-dollar fortune. Early the next morning, I was jolted awake by a frantic pounding on the door. I stumbled downstairs in a daze and opened it to find a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, flanked by two construction workers. "Mr. Edward Caldwell?" he asked, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses, his tone flawlessly polite. I nodded. "I'm the regional manager for Apex Properties," he said, handing me a business card. "This building, and in fact the entire street, has been acquired by our new owner. I'm here to officially inform you that, starting this month, your rent will be increasing tenfold." That one sentence completely snapped me awake. 10 times the rent? My little shop barely clears a few $1,000s a month. After paying for stock and the old rent, I have just enough left over to get by. A tenfold rent hike wasn't a notice. It was a thinly veiled eviction. "Who's the new landlord?" I asked, though Ashton's furious face had already flashed in my mind. The manager's lips curved into a knowing smile. He didn't say a word, which told me everything I needed to know. "If you're unable to pay the new rent, Mr. Caldwell," he continued, "we are contractually entitled to have you vacate the premises within 3 days." With that, he and his men turned and walked away. I glanced down at the stiff business card in my hand, then looked around my little shop. The wooden shelves were lined with old books, and the air held the quiet, comforting smell of old paper and dust. It looked like my slacker life was about to be put on hold. It was a ruthless, scorched earth tactic. Ashton's plan was obvious: destroy my livelihood, leave me with no options, and force me to come crawling back to him. But he'd overlooked one thing. I might not have any grand ambitions, but I'll be damned if I let someone force me to bow down. So what if I lose the shop? I'll just get a minimum wage job. I could survive on a couple thousand a month. As long as I can keep living the slacker life, it doesn't matter where I do it. I slowly started packing things up, boxing the books worth keeping, and getting the rest ready for a clearance sale. When the neighbors heard what was happening, they started trickling in to offer their support and speak on my behalf. "Edward's such an honest kid. How'd he end up with such a heartless landlord? 10 times the rent? That's just trying to bankrupt the poor man. It's obvious they're just trying to drive him out. I heard the new owner is some rich brat in a sports car who gets his kicks bullying honest folks." I just smiled and told everyone not to worry. "It's all right," I said. "When one door closes, another one opens." The 3 days passed quickly. I had just taped up the last box and was about to look for a van to move everything. Just then, a black sedan pulled up and the same property manager got out. I figured he had come to personally oversee my eviction and brace myself for an argument. But what he said next nearly made me choke. "Mr. Caldwell," he began, a bizarre, sycophantic smile on his face. "Your rent, it's been taken care of." I stared at him. "By who?" "A kind benefactor who wishes to remain anonymous," the manager replied, his expression growing even stranger. "Not only did they pay the new rent, they paid it in advance for the next 10 years. I was speechless. The manager wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead and continued with his obviously rehearsed speech. He also said that he has great admiration for a man of culture and principle such as yourself. He hopes you will continue to operate your bookstore here, to preserve a beacon of literature in this historic neighborhood." He paused, then added, "Oh, and one small detail. He also purchased the building itself and has had the title transferred directly into your name. Here is the deed. Please take it." I took the documents in a daze, my mind reeling. What kind of lunatic move was this? I didn't have to wonder who was behind it. This mysterious benefactor was obviously Ashton. But for the life of me, I couldn't figure out his logic. First, he tries to crush me with a crippling rent hike. Then, when he realizes I'm actually about to pack up and leave, he panics and not only pays a decade of exorbitant rent, but also gifts me the entire building. What was his angle? Was I supposed to be grateful and then meekly follow him back to the family estate? Around the corner, inside that red Maserati, Ashton watched through the windshield as the manager handed me the deed. He slammed his fist on the steering wheel and screamed into his phone, "Are you an idiot? Are you a moron? Who told you to give him the shop? I told you to find a way to cover his rent so he'd stay put. Stay put, you understand? If he actually closed up shop and became a drifter, how would I ever find him again?" On the other end of the line, his assistant's voice trembled. "But, Mr. Pierce, you said to use any means necessary. I meant do whatever it takes to keep him here, not start a charity in his name." Ashton was losing his mind. This is just great. Now he owns the building. His roots here are even deeper. There's no way he'll leave. I'm a genius. I personally helped him reinforce his throne of laziness. I looked down at the deed in my hand and was silent for a long time. That fake heir really didn't think like a normal person. Now that the shop was officially mine, my life as a slacker entered a new golden age. I was open for maybe 2 hours a day total. The rest of the time was sacred and personal for reading books, drinking tea, and petting the stray cat who had decided to adopt me. I didn't get many customers, mostly just familiar faces. One of them was a regular named Miriam Miller. She was a student at the local university and came in almost every day. She was pretty and smart, with a quiet, gentle quality that made made her instantly memorable. She would always find a corner to read, never a bother, as if she were a natural part of the shop's atmosphere. I admired her, but my slacker philosophy dictated a strict policy of never making the first move. If it was meant to be, it would happen. If it seemed like too much work, I'd pass. Ashton, on the other hand, clearly decided it was time for a new strategy. Since the financial assault had failed, he decided to attack my social life. The other day, just after Miriam had left, a few guys sauntered into the store. They were a couple of punks, dressed like they were trying too hard, led by one with bleach blonde hair. He shot me a sidelong glance and sneered. "Edward Caldwell." I nodded. "Heard you latched onto some rich sugar mama," he said with a snide laugh. "Look at that pretty face. Why don't you share some of your tricks with us?" I frowned but didn't say anything. They started wandering around the shop, flipping through things and making nasty comments. "Wow, you're charging this much for these old rags. Well, I guess the owner has a nice face. No wonder he can get by on his looks." That's when it hit me. This was Ashton's new plan. He wanted to ruin my reputation, turn my neighbors and friends against me, and leave me with no one to turn about him. It sounded clever in theory, but the execution was less than stellar. Before I could even say anything, a few of my neighbors had already stormed in. "What do you think you're doing?" shouted Mr. Henderson from the bakery, brandishing a bag of groceries at the blonde kid. He pointed right in his face. "Bullying a good kid in broad daylight? Have you no shame?" Mrs. Gable from the flower shop joined in, wielding her broom like a weapon. "Edward is a wonderful young man. Don't you dare speak that filth in here." The wannabe thugs were obviously just hired help and had no idea they were about to incur the wrath of the entire neighborhood. Within seconds, they were being chased out of the store by an intimidating crowd of senior citizens, shouting at them the whole way. And just like that, the crisis was effortlessly resolved by my kind neighbors. I shook my head and smiled as I poured tea for my rescuers. "Don't you worry, Edward," Mr. Henderson said, patting my shoulder. "If they ever come back, so will we." "That's right," Mrs. Gable added. "On this street, we don't stand for bullies picking on good people." A genuine warmth spread through my chest. Meanwhile, the mastermind behind this failed operation, Ashton Pierce, was sitting in his sports car across the street, watching the whole thing unfold through a pair of binoculars. His face was contorted with rage as he cursed under his breath. "A bunch of useless morons. Who told them to go inside the store? I told them to spread rumors on the street. Are they incapable of following simple directions?" His original plan was to have the rumors slowly make their way to Miriam, to make her doubt my character and distance herself from me. Instead, these idiots stormed my shop and not only failed to tarnish my name, but actually helped cast me as the victim, an innocent scholar being oppressed by a soulless corporation. Over the next few days, my little bookstore became absurdly popular. People came in droves, some out of sympathy, others just to see the spectacle. "Wow, you're him, right?" one kid in glasses asked excitedly. "The bookseller who stood up to the big corporation?" I sighed. "Are you buying a book? I heard you turned down a wealthy benefactor to protect this shop's integrity." A middle-aged woman said, her eyes shining. "Ma'am, that first edition of A Brief History of Time is not for sale," I replied wearily. Miriam came by as usual, but this time her look held a mixture of concern and something else I couldn't quite place. Was it admiration? "Edward, don't be scared," she said softly. "I know you're not what they say you are. You have real principles." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. I hadn't done anything. I had continued to live my slacker life, just as before. How had I suddenly been upgraded to a man of principle? Did this world have a completely skewed definition of what a slacker was? Ashton's plan had backfired again, this time in spectacular fashion. Far from ruining my life, he had managed to turn my quiet little bookstore into a local tourist trap. Looking at the crowds milling about outside my door for the first time, I felt exhausted by my own slacker lifestyle. "Can't you all just go away and let me lie down?" Ashton was about to have a meltdown. He sat in his penthouse office, hands trembling, staring at the report from the private investigator. It read, "Subject Edward Caldwell. Currently perceived by the public as being targeted by a major developer, he has cultivated the image of a persecuted hero, garnering significant local sympathy. His bookstore is now a well-known local landmark. On social media, engagement surrounding Caldwell's old books is at an all-time high. Popular hashtags include hashtag bookstore owner versus billionaires, hashtag Caldwell says no, and hashtag the real Boston scholar. Furthermore, the subject's relationship with local university student Miriam Miller appears to be growing closer. Public opinion views them as a couple forged in adversity." With a crack, Ashton slammed the tablet onto the marble floor. "What real Boston scholar?" he seethed. "I'll show you what a real scholar is." He paced his office like a caged animal. I paid them to destroy his reputation, not to make him a local celebrity. His assistant huddled by the door, afraid to even breathe. "If the soft approach won't work, we'll try something harder," Ashton snarled, a crazed look in his eye. "Find some professionals. Have them invite him back to the Pierce estate. And I mean invite. Be polite. right. Don't lay a hand on him. If he loses a single hair on his head, my father will skin me alive. He was on the very edge of a complete breakdown. He had only one thought left: get this hot potato back to the Pierce family in one piece, collect his generous severance package, and disappear to some small country with no extradition treaty. He was sick of living in constant fear. And so, one pitch-black night, just as I was locking up the shop to go to bed, an unmarked black van pulled up silently to the curb. The side door slid open, and 4 large men in black suits hopped out. "Mr. Caldwell, our employer would like a word with you," the one in the lead said in a low voice, gesturing toward the van. I sighed. "Ashton, you're really not going to give this up, are you?" I was debating whether to just go with them or lie down on the ground and play dead when suddenly a crowd of people charged out a nearby alley. "Stop right there." The man in the lead was Mr. Henderson, the same one who'd helped me with the punks a few days before. Behind him was Mrs. Gable from the flower shop, Mr. Chun from the laundromat, and Mrs. Rodriguez from the corner store. It seemed like the entire street had turned out a veritable army armed with a bizarre assortment of weapons: rolling pins, frying pans, feather dusters, the works. "You bastards are back to bully Edward again, aren't you? Get him, everyone. Protect Edward." The 4 professional bodyguards were caught completely by surprise. They were trained security professionals, not street brawlers, and they had no idea how to handle this mob of angry senior citizens. Fighting back was out of the question. If they so much as knocked one of them over, they could be facing a mountain of lawsuits. But if they didn't fight back, all they could do was watch as the intimidating crowd slowly closed in. The situation quickly got out of hand. The mob of seniors surrounded the 4 large men, brandishing their weapons and launching a furious verbal assault. "You're all big, strong men. Why don't you get decent jobs instead of taking money to kidnap people? Look at Edward and then look at yourselves. Can't you see the difference?" The 4 men's faces were bright red. They stood there in silence, taking the verbal abuse without a word. Just then, police sirens echoed in the distance. Some civic-minded neighbor had already called 911. And in the end, our entire bizarre crew, me the victim, the 4 kidnappers, and several dozen righteous neighbors, were all rounded up and taken down to the local precinct to give statements. At that very moment, Ashton was in a members-only club downtown, drowning his sorrows. His phone rang just as he was lifting a glass to his lips. When his assistant finished shakily explaining what had happened, the whiskey glass slipped from Ashton's hand and shattered on the floor. "They were all arrested?" "Yes, Mr. Pierce. You'll have to go down to the station to bail them out." Ashton's vision swam. He nearly fainted. The top-tier security team he'd paid a fortune for hadn't even laid a finger on me before they were surrounded by a neighborhood watch posse of senior citizens and hauled off to jail. How was this possible? What was wrong with the world? How could every single one of his plans go so completely, incomprehensibly wrong? By the time I got out of the station, the sun was starting to rise. I'd given my statement, gotten a commendation from the officer on duty, and thanked all of my neighbors individually. I was completely drained. All I want is to live a slacker's life. I muttered to myself. Why is that so hard? Ashton's relentless schemes hadn't broken me. Instead, they had turned me into a public figure, a role I had absolutely no desire to play. I was now the most respected resident on my street, a cultural beacon to a bunch of strangers on the internet. I'd even gotten interview requests from several local news stations, all of which I'd turned down, claiming to be camera shy. I was exhausted, a deep, bone-weary kind of tired. For the first time ever, I closed the shop for the entire day. I hung a cardboard sign on the door that read, "Owner is having an existential crisis. Closed until further notice." All I wanted was a little peace and quiet. Of course, someone was determined not to let me have it. That afternoon, there was a knock at the door. I pretended not to hear. The knocking continued, persistent and desperate. Annoyed, I stomped downstairs and threw the door open. It was Ashton. He looked even worse than I felt. His dark circles were so bad he looked like he hadn't slept in days. His hair was a mess, and his expensive suit was a wrinkled disaster. He stared at me, his lip trembling, and then, to my astonishment, he burst into tears. A man well over 6 feet tall, crying like a little kid who dropped his ice cream cone. I froze. "Please," he sobbed, grabbing my arm, his face a mess of tears and snot. "I'm begging you, just come home with me. I'll get on my knees. I'll do anything." And with that, he actually dropped to his knees on my doorstep. I jumped back, startled, and stumbled back into my rocking chair. "What are you doing? I can't take it anymore." Ashton screamed hysterically. "I just can't. I just want to give you your life back, let you be the heir, take my severance, warrants and disappear. I don't want to run the company anymore. I don't want to deal with those old sharks on the board. I threw money at you, and you threw it back in my face. I tried to force you out with a rent hike, and you became a local celebrity. I tried to ruin your reputation, and you became a moral icon. I sent men to bring you back, and you became a folk hero overnight. Edward, tell me, he pleaded, the raw desperation in his voice almost making me feel sorry for him. What do I have to do to get you to let me off the hook? I stared at him, speechless. All this time, he hadn't been trying to destroy me at all. He was trying to invite me back. His goal was never to crush me. It was to dump the entire burdensome Pierce family legacy back onto my head. His logic was so twisted, it could have been a case study in a psychology textbook. I started about to say something, anything to get him to leave. Just then, the shop door clicked open. An elegantly dressed, middle-aged couple stood in the doorway. The woman was immaculately preserved, her features delicate, with only the faintest lines around her eyes betraying her age. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears, her lips trembling. The man beside her stood tall and imposing, radiating an aura of power, but his stern face was a mask of pure shock. They were Harrison and Eleanor Pierce, the true heads of the Pierce family, and, legally speaking, my biological parents. It seemed they had heard about Ashton's recent erratic behavior and had followed him here. And the first thing they saw upon walking in was their precious adopted son, the heir to the Pierce fortune, kneeling on the floor of a dusty little bookstore, sobbing and clinging to a strange man's leg, begging him to come home and take over the family business. And this strange man he was clinging to had a face that was the spitting image of a young Harrison Pierce. The air in the room froze. Eleanor covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Harrison staggered and would have fallen if a bodyguard hadn't steadied him. Ashton looked up and saw them, and his crying stopped abruptly. The look on his face was even more pathetic than his tears had been. I surveyed the chaotic scene, calmly picked up my teacup, and took a sip. The tea was cold. A single thought echoed in my mind. Why? Why can't you people just let me be a slacker in peace? The living room of the Pierce family mansion was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. The four of us, me, Ashton, Harrison, and Eleanor, sat on an absurdly luxurious sofa with an invisible chasm between us. Eleanor was the first to speak. She looked at me, her eyes red. My boy, she said, her voice trembling. You must have suffered all these years. I shook my head. Not really. Life's been pretty good. It was the truth. Aside from Ashton's recent campaign of harassment, my slacker life had been nearly perfect. Harrison's gaze shifted between me and Ashton, finally settling on Ashton with a glare. Ashton, explain, he said, his voice cold as ice. Ashton flinched, then began to stammer out a heavily edited and embellished version of the recent events. In his telling, he was the noble, selfless older brother who, upon discovering my existence, was overcome with guilt and had done everything in his power to bring me back into the family and set things right. He reframed his series of idiotic, backfiring schemes as well-intentioned tests and carefully orchestrated guidance. I nearly fell asleep listening to it. Harrison and Eleanor obviously didn't buy completely, but on the one hand, there was their adopted son who had just been a sobbing mess on my floor, and on the other, there was the biological son who sat perfectly calm and composed. For a moment, they seemed at a loss for words. Edward, Eleanor finally said, turning to me, her voice soft and pleading, no matter what's happened, you are a Pierce. Please come home with us. That's where you belong. I set down my teacup. No. 3 pairs of eyes snapped toward me. Why? Harrison frowned. The Pierce family can give you anything you could possibly want. Wealth, status, power. Too much trouble. I cut in. What? All 3 of them said at once. Being the heir to a billion-dollar fortune is too much trouble, I explained patiently. You have to learn all sorts of things, run a company, manage people, and watch your back every second of the day. I don't want that life. I just want to stay in my little bookstore, read my books, and sit in the sun. I paused, then added, my greatest ambition in life is to be a world-class slacker. The living room fell silent once more. Ashton was staring at me as if I had just sprouted a second head. The expressions on Harrison and Eleanor's faces morphed from shock to confusion to utter bewilderment. So, you mean all this time, Ashton stammered, you weren't testing me? You weren't playing some grand, strategic game? You're overthinking it, I said, glancing at him. I'm just lazy. Ashton looked like he'd been struck by lightning. He had agonized over this, turned his entire life upside down, and my reason for refusing it all was simply laziness. The look on his face was one of a man whose entire worldview had just been shattered. Eleanor started to speak, but Harrison held up a hand to stop her. The business titan, who had spent decades dominating boardrooms and crushing competitors, studied me in silence, a new, calculating look in his eyes. Finally, he let out a long sigh. So be it. He looked from his devastated adopted son to his perfectly placid biological one. A look of deep, profound exhaustion settled on his face. Edward, if you don't want to come back, we won't force force you. But as a form of compensation, you may choose any property from the Pierce family's portfolio to be your own. And take this. He handed me a credit card, even more exclusive than the one Ashton had offered. No PIN, no credit limit. I shook my head and pushed the card back across the table. Like I said, all I want is my bookstore. Harrison's brow furrowed. It was likely the first time in his life anyone had ever refused a gift from him. The sense of failure was almost visible on his face. Maybe for some people, freedom of the mind and soul really was worth more than all the houses and cars in the world. The end of this whole farce was fittingly dramatic. Harrison Pierce made a decision no one saw coming. He announced that Ashton would remain the heir to the Pierce group, but he would have to earn it. His crime was his failure to bring me back into the family. His penance was to experience my ideal life for himself. In other words, the life of a slacker. The official story was that it was a special program to experience the life of a commoner and build character. And so, Ashton Pierce, once the pinnacle of high society, had his credit cards and luxury cars confiscated, was put on a $2,000 a month allowance, and was unceremoniously dumped in my bookstore to work as a clerk. And I, in a sudden turn of events, became his direct supervisor and life coach. I looked down at the corporate card Harrison had forced on me. It was my salary for this supervisory role. Then I looked at Ashton standing there in a cheap t-shirt and jeans, looking like all the life had been drained out of him. What had my life become? Not only had I failed to get rid of him, now I had to look at his face every day at work. My perfect slacker life was officially over. Ashton's first day was an absolute disaster. He didn't even know how to sweep properly, sending clouds of dust all over the shelves. When he mopped, he sloshed dirty water everywhere. When a customer asked him for a recommendation, he rolled his eyes. "You've never even heard of In Search of Lost Time?" he said condescendingly. "Do you even read?" The customer stormed out, red-faced and fuming. I pulled Ashton aside. "Could you at least try to take this seriously?" I said through gritted teeth. "If you don't want to be here, just go home." "Of course I don't want to be here," he whined. "And it's all your fault." My head was pounding. The next few days became a war of attrition. He did everything he could to slack off and cause trouble, hoping I would finally get fed up and fire him. And I, in turn, pushed back, determined to whip him into a halfway decent employee. "Ashton, the books are sorted by genre, not by the color of the spine. Ashton, you can't use a feather duster on a first edition. Use a soft cloth. Do you understand? A soft cloth. Ashton, be nicer to the customers. The customer is always right. I'm the one who's always right," he muttered under his breath. "What was that?" "Nothing," he said quickly. "The customer is always right, and you're even righter." The days passed in a chaotic, ridiculous blur. And strangely, business wasn't just unaffected, it was better than ever. A lot more young women had started coming to the shop, all of them there to see the disgraced prince. "Wow, is that him? The heir who got disowned by his family. He's so tragic. Look at him trying to dust the shelves. It's so clumsy and cute. Mr. Caldwell, you have to take good care of him." I was speechless. Somehow, Ashton had become more popular than me. He basked in the attention, all the while shooting me glances that clearly said, "When I get back on top, you'll be the first to go." I couldn't be bothered to care. As long as he didn't interfere with my nap time, he could do whatever he wanted. That is, until Miriam showed up at the door again. The moment she saw Ashton behind the counter, she stopped in her tracks. Ashton saw her too, and his eyes lit up. He had clearly identified Miriam as someone I cared about, and therefore, the perfect target for his revenge. A very bad idea began to form in his mind. Ashton started deliberately trying to get close to Miriam. Whenever she came to the shop, he would hover nearby, offering her unsolicited, thoughtful advice. "A woman of your sensibilities would surely appreciate Baudelaire," he'd say. "This is a new translation of The Flowers of Evil with a very fine binding." He was deploying the full force of the charm he'd perfected in his Playboy days. He was witty and well-spoken, his manners impeccable. Miriam was reserved at first, but she gradually started to warm up to him, and I just sat in my rocking chair, watching it all unfold like a detached observer. I knew exactly what Ashton was up to. He wanted to steal my girl away, make me so heartbroken and miserable that I would give up my slacker life and trade places with him. How naive. For a true slacker, dating is a chore. I was more than happy to be left alone. I was even secretly rooting for him. "Go for it, man. If you succeed, I can finally get some peace." But once again, things did not go according to Ashton's plan. One afternoon, it was just the three of us in the shop. Ashton decided his moment had come. He produced a bouquet of roses from under the counter and strode over to Miriam. "Miriam," he said, his voice full of feigned sincerity, "from the moment I first saw you, I was captivated. You are the only light in my dark life. Will you be my girlfriend?" Miriam was stunned. She looked at Ashton, then stole a glance at me. I was pretending to be absorbed in my book, but I was listening intently, ready for the drama. A flicker of indecision crossed her face before she said softly, "I'm sorry, Ashton. I can't." The smile froze on his face. "Why? Am I not good enough for you?" "No, that's not it," Miriam said, shaking her head. "You're a very nice person." She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for something, and then walked right over to me. As Ashton and I both stared, dumbfounded, she looked up at me and said, slowly and clearly, "Edward, I like you." My brain short-circuited. The roses fell from Ashton's hand. He looked like his entire operating system had crashed and given him the blue screen of death. "Why?" he howled, a cry of pure anguish. "Why is it always you? What does he have that I don't? He's a pathetic slacker." Miriam's cheeks were bright red, but she kept her eyes fixed on me. "I don't know," she said softly. "I just know that when I saw you standing up to those powerful people to protect this little bookstore, I thought you were incredible. And then, when you kept trying to ruin him, he stayed so calm and centered through it all. I thought there was something special about him. And when I realized that he could have anything in the world, but all he wanted was this little shop, I knew he was the man I'd been searching for." I was completely speechless. "Lady, you've got it all wrong. That wasn't me standing up to the powerful. That was me being too lazy to move. That wasn't me being calm and unbothered. That was me being too lazy to care. And that wasn't me protecting my own little world. It was me being too lazy to find a new place to take a nap. Are the rose-colored glasses you're looking at me through made of reinforced concrete?" Ashton, for his part, was completely broken. He pointed a trembling finger from me to Miriam and back again, his mouth opening and closing without a sound. His brilliant plan to steal the girl had somehow backfired and become the very thing that pushed her into the arms of his rival. Could anything be more tragic? Yes, the fact that I turned her down. "I'm sorry, Miriam," I said. I looked into her sincere, hopeful eyes and felt a pang of guilt, but I had to say it. "You're a wonderful person, but dating is just too much trouble." It was my reason, simple, pure, and brutally honest. Miriam was stunned. Ashton was stunned. They both stared at me as if a fossil had just started speaking. The awkwardness in the little shop was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Life is a stage, and everyone on it is an actor. Everyone except me. I'm too lazy to even learn my lines. The two members of the confession brigade had both failed spectacularly. One ran out of the shop in tears, and the other collapsed to the floor to contemplate the shattered remains of his life. At last, I had some peace and quiet. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and settled back onto my throne, the creaky old rocking chair. Ashton lay motionless on the floor for a good half hour before slowly picking himself up. He dragged himself over to me, looking utterly defeated. "I give up," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've lost completely." "Good," I nodded. "Now you know. I just don't get it," he said, looking up at me with confused eyes. "Why is it that you do nothing and get everything, and I try so hard and end up with nothing?" I thought for a moment and decided to be merciful and bestow a little wisdom on him. "It's because you want too much," I said. "You want to keep your position and get a big payout and get revenge on me and get the girl. Everything you do is a calculation, a transaction. That's why you're so exhausted. Me, I don't want anything. I just want to lie down. When you stop wanting things, you become invincible. See?" Ashton stared at me blankly, a look of error, file not found on his face. He seemed to be trying to process my slacker philosophy. After a long moment, he let out a long breath, as if all the fight had gone out of him. "I get it." Then he turned, silently picked up a broom, and began sweeping up the scattered rose petals. He was still moving slowly, but for the first time, there was a meticulousness to his actions. I was surprised. Had my little speech actually gotten through to him? From that day on, Ashton changed. He stopped trying to cause trouble and started earnestly learning how to be a bookstore clerk. He organized the shelves, patiently answered customers' questions, and even learned to make a decent cup of coffee. He still had that smug, "I'm better than you" look on his face, but he was slowly, surely, becoming a model employee. The atmosphere in the shop, once a chaotic battleground, settled into a strange kind of harmony. We fell into an unspoken arrangement. He did all the work, I continued to lie down. He played the part of the tragic, fallen prince, and I did absolutely nothing. It was perfect. I truly thought my slacker life was finally back on track. Until a month later, when Harrison Pierce walked into my shop again. This time, he was followed by a group of serious-looking men in suits, the board of directors. He looked at the new and improved Ashton, then at me, lazing in my rocking chair. A slow, satisfied smile spread across his face. "Very good," Harrison said with a nod. "This little experiment is over. Ashton, your trial is complete. You've passed." Ashton was stunned. "Trial? What trial?" "A trial to see if living like a normal person could temper your character," Harrison said, clapping him on the shoulder. "And it seems to have been a rousing success. You've matured. You're ready to take over the company." Ashton was speechless. I was in a daze myself. This whole thing had been another one of Harrison's elaborate schemes. And as for Edward, Harrison said, turning to me with a warm, genuine smile, "Thank you for your guidance of my son during this time. To show my gratitude, this bookstore and this entire street are now yours." He shoved a thick stack of documents into my hands. I looked down at the pile of deeds, then glanced over at Ashton's stunned face. So not only had Ashton been working for me for free for a month, but all of his suffering had resulted in me becoming the landlord of the entire street. The reality of the situation finally hit Ashton. again. He pointed a trembling finger at his father, then at me, his whole body shaking with rage. Dad, you set me up? Before he could finish, his eyes rolled back in his head and he collapsed on the floor. The room erupted into chaos. I watched the absurd drama unfold, calmly tucking the thick folder of deeds under my arm. It seemed I had leveled up from slacker with a shop to slacker who owns an entire commercial street. Life, it turns out, is full of pleasant surprises. Ashton was carried out. He came to for a moment, just as they were putting him in the car, and used his last ounce of strength to shout, "This isn't over, Edward Caldwell," before passing out again. Harrison and Eleanor thanked me profusely and solemnly swore they would never bother my slacker life again. They had finally understood that I was a brick wall, immovable, unbreakable, and utterly deaf to persuasion. The world was finally quiet again. Miriam came by a few more times, but it was clear she still didn't quite know what to make of me. She eventually seemed to realize that we were from two completely different worlds. The last time she came was to say goodbye. "I'm going abroad for school," she said. "Edward, you're the most unique person I've ever met. I hope you'll always be a happy slacker." I nodded. "Travel safe." And then she was gone. The bookstore was quiet again, and I was alone. I was now the landlord of the entire street, with more rent money coming in every month than I could ever possibly spend. I expanded the shop a little, added a small coffee bar and a comfortable reading nook. I adopted a few more cats. I still only opened for 2 hours a day. The rest of the time, I sat in my rocking chair, reading, drinking tea, petting my cats, and soaking up the sun. Occasionally, I'll get an anonymous iMessage from Ashton. "Don't think you've won. I'll be back. I just closed a $3 billion deal. What did you do today? More of the old sharks on the board are coming after me. This is all your fault." I read them, smile, and delete them. Then I roll over and go back to my nap. The afternoon sun streams through the window, warm and golden. A big, fluffy orange cat hops onto my stomach, curls into a ball, and purrs contentedly. This is the life I've always wanted. As for that fake heir who once cried and begged me to take his fortune, he can carry the weight of the material world for me. After all, someone has to bear the terrible, heavy suffering that comes with all that fame and money. And me? I just want to be a happy, lazy slacker. The kind of person who, after being run over by life, can just calmly roll over and let the sun warm his other side. This absurd story has ended, but the ripples it leaves in our minds have perhaps just begun to spread. Many of us, like Ashton, are pushed by an invisible hand to climb a mountain we did not choose. We are told the view from the top is spectacular, that it is the only definition of success. So we climb, breathless and afraid, terrified of being left behind. This story, through its too lazy to move protagonist, gently asks us a question. Hey, have you ever considered that you can choose not to climb? This is not a call to lie flat or give up, but a reminder of a forgotten piece of wisdom. True strength is not about conquering the world, but about making peace with yourself. The protagonist's laziness isn't a passive escape, but a conscious choice. He knows exactly what he wants: sunlight, the smell of old books, the purring of a cat, and his own inner peace. That certainty gives him the strength to say no to everything else. We so often measure our lives by external yardsticks: wealth, status, the approval of others. This story offers an internal one, a ruler that asks, are you at ease? Are you happy? Asterisk, asterisk. So, as you finish this story, perhaps it is worth asking yourself, is the mountain I am climbing the one I truly want to be on? Perhaps at the foot of your own mountain, in your own old bookstore, lies a treasure that could bring you a lifetime of comfort. Find it, protect it. That, in itself, is the greatest success of all, one you never have to prove to anyone.